What is up, everybody? It is JT Sports. I'm back to you guys with another NFL training camp preview. Today, I'm here with my guy, Ross Jackson. He's here to preview the New Orleans Saints training camp with us. What's going on, man?
What's good, brother? Glad to be here with you, man. Appreciate you having me on.
I'm glad to have you on, man. So before we begin, can you let the people know where they can find you at and what you do and what you have coming up on the channel over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. So y'all can find me on Twitter at Ross Jackson Nola, Nola. I'm covering the Saints over at the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm the daily host of our 5-day-a-week show, Locked On Saints, which you can find on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast if you just want the audio version on the go. You could also catch some of the write-ups that we're working on as well over at CanalStreetChronicles.com, where I'm the co-managing editor over there. So we have a bunch coming up in terms of just making sure that everybody knows every name on the roster heading into training camp for the New Orleans Saints. We have a midweek fundamentals segment to where we break down what you need to know just from a basic football standpoint and get to understand the game of football a little bit better, both on the field and with contracts, which is a passion of mine. And then, of course, also making sure that you're staying up to date with everything you need to know about the New Orleans Saints.
And you guys can make sure to check out my guy Ross Jackson on Locked On Saints. I will have the link to his channel down in the pinned comment section down below. And once again, I appreciate you for coming on. And you guys make sure to go ahead, not only subscribe to him, but to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Turn on post notifications. So the first thing I want to talk about this QB battle. Now, everybody knows that I'm a diehard Jameis Winston fan. He's my favorite NFL player of all time. So I have a lot of bias when it comes to the New Orleans Saints this year. I feel like he's going to be able to get you guys to the playoffs. I don't know if you're as confident as Jameis as I am, but I mean, like, if I was a betting man, I'm 19 years old, so I'm 2 years removed until I'm able to legally gamble. But if somebody gave me $1,000 right now and said, okay, you got to choose who you think is going to start, Taysom or Jameis, I would take Jameis. And I like Taysom. You get what I'm saying? Like, I felt like he was a great piece of the offense in terms of the way he was utilized, but his first couple of games, okay, was nice, but then against the Falcons, it was rough, man. And then you got Jameis. I was really shocked Jameis ain't get a shot last year. Like, he came in like when Drew Brees went down in the last quarter against the 49ers for like a drive or two, and I was like, dang. So, like, how you feeling about this whole QB battle? Is it Jameis and Taysom, or is Ian Book somewhat a factor here?
All right, so let's take a look at it this way. I'll tell you right now. I'm gonna give you a little virtual fist bump first to start off because I'm a Jameis guy myself. So I am all about Jameis Winston being the guy that's in the lead right now in terms of this quarterback competition. But this is a legitimate quarterback competition, the first one in New Orleans in 20 years since Jeff Blake versus Aaron Brooks. So it's a big deal right now with what's going down after Drew Brees having retired after 15 very successful seasons in New Orleans. And look, I look at Jameis as the leader here, but this is very much going to be a true quarterback competition. The Saints organization, Sean Payton, they love Taysom Hill. The 4 games that we saw of Taysom Hill last year don't really tell you anything about his ability to have an offense built around him and to be able to run that offense with full-on installs being done over the course of the offseason, everything like that. So I think that because of that and because of the trust that the organization has in Taysom, he has his boost. And then you look at Jameis Winston, who has 2 things that the Saints really covet in players: NFL experience, confidence. Jameis Winston has that. No questions about it. He's saying and doing all the right things so far here over the course of the offseason. He's winning right now the competition as far as I'm concerned in terms of being the leader, right? In terms of the off-field leadership that he's shown and getting these guys to work out with him and like sharing everything he's doing. Yeah, exactly. Like doing all that. Like, that's all great to see. Now, can he translate it and get it out onto the field? So he has the things that the Saints like. And even Mickey Loomis, Saints general manager, just a couple of days ago, talked about it and said Jameis Winston has all the tools, but he still has to win the job. So he's got to be able to prove that he can do it. And it's going to come down to who's going to be least detrimental to the team while also providing the massive upside that both of these players provide in their own way. Taysom Hill has a fumbling issue. Jameis Winston has the interception issue that has tracked him over the course of his career. I tend to rule out the 30 interception season and not put too much stock in that because it's a bit of an anomaly. And we've seen with Bruce Arians, I'm just saying, we've seen with Bruce Arians the first year with the quarterback, their interceptions are usually at their career high with Bruce Arians in that system. The risk it for the biscuit thing, you ain't always getting the biscuit. You know what I'm saying?
You're speaking exactly what I've been telling people for over the last couple of months.
Yeah, that's exactly the way that I look at it. And so Yeah, I think that you take Jameis Winston, you put him in Sean Payton's system, things change. You take Taysom Hill, you get him full time in Sean Payton's system, things change. So I think both of them are in a really good position here, and they both have a legitimate shot at winning the quarterback spot. To speak to real quick, last year with Taysom Hill getting those 4 starts, even though Jameis Winston came in as an emergency quarterback, before Taysom Hill signed his contract extension with the Saints, that RFA tender that he had as a restricted free agent, part of the negotiation, not really part of the negotiation, but part of the kind of person to person agreement between Taysom and Sean Payton was that if Drew Brees were to miss extended time during the season, that Taysom Hill would be the quarterback. But if anything happened in game and they needed to put somebody else in the game, that they would leave him at his sort of jack of all trades, sort of Swiss Army knife role. So that's why you saw Taysom come in game, Jameis come in game, but then Taysom get those actual starts afterwards. Sean Payton's a very loyal coach to his players, and that was him being good to his word.
Ah, okay. So what about Ian Book? Now,
Oh, right.
is because we know Jameis is on a 1-year deal, and if Jameis balls out this year, then there's probably a good chance he probably will be cashing out somewhere else due to the Saints salary cap constraints. So is Ian Book being groomed to be that guy just in case Jameis ends up going crazy this year and leaving?
Yeah, this is a big conversation that a lot of us are having right now because we don't know that whoever wins the starting quarterback role in 2021 becomes the future franchise quarterback of the New Orleans Saints. There's no guarantee there. Either one of these guys could go out and absolutely ball out in 2021 and then get a contract somewhere else. It could happen to either one of these quarterbacks. And so the New Orleans Saints, with having Ian Book in the back, have a little bit of an insurance plan there because he's the only quarterback that's actually on contract going into the 2022 season in years that actually exist, right? That are actually agreed upon years. You have a lot of void years and things like that that bridge the gap for Taysom as well as for Jameis, but those aren't actual years that they're under contract. And so Ian Book is somebody that they'll get a really good look at. He does a lot of things that Drew Brees does, plus more, because he gives you the ability to be able to extend plays. He's extremely calm under pressure. He can get outside the pocket. They just need to get him to a throw-first mentality as opposed to a bail and run-first mentality, which you started to see during that 30-5 run that he had with Notre Dame, being the winningest quarterback in a very historied franchise. So I would keep an eye out on Ian Book as an option for 2022's competition, if there is going to be a competition at that time. But I would also keep an eye out on the Saints draft plan going into 2022 as well, if they end up losing either one or both of these quarterbacks in Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill.
You guys make sure to check out my guy Ross Jackson on Locked On Saints. I will have the link to his channel in the pinned comment section down below. When you look at wide receiver, we know about Michael Thomas. He missed pretty much the whole entire season, basically. I mean, He went down against Tampa, came back against Tampa, wasn't really that effective. So he's coming back. We know what he should be able to do when he's healthy. But what about the guys that's going to be behind him? Because you lost Emmanuel Sanders, who's now with Buffalo. I'm really high on Traquan Smith, but he's been in New Orleans for a couple of years, hasn't really materialized yet. So, like, who's going to be that number 2 wide receiver, and who do you think has that lead in that number 2 wide receiver conversation heading into camp?
Yeah, I think that the wide receiver position is kind of akin to the quarterback position. I'll tell you who's in the lead for me, but this is very much still an open competition. The New Orleans Saints usually have their wide receiver depth chart behind Michael Thomas kind of written in chalk, and then you see it change week to week over the course of training camp until they decide on where they want to go. They get a good look at everybody. So guys like Deontay Harris, Marquez Callaway, Jalen McCleskey, these guys are all going to get good looks. Lil Jordan Humphrey, they're all going to get looks. But Traquan Smith is in the lead here for me. He was the last wide receiver that the New Orleans Saints actually drafted up until this 2021 NFL draft, where they brought in Kawaan Baker from Southern Miss, who will also get an opportunity to compete over on the outside. But the thing about Traquan Smith is that you look at that last season at UCF, where he had 19.8 yards per reception, went over 1,000 yards, double-digit touchdowns, just absolutely balled out, and earned himself that third-round selection that the Saints utilized to get him in 2018. He hasn't been able to play that style of ball since being in New Orleans. They had Ted Ginn Jr. on the outside, so he ended up learning the slot position and having to learn the slot position because they didn't have another option there. Then they move on from Ted Ginn Jr. and immediately bring in Emmanuel Sanders, who plays a little bit of everywhere. And then so you saw Traquan Smith have this nice season last year, even though he was kind of splitting all over the place. If you look at the games that have been most successful to him, he's only got about 3 or 4 games where he's had 80 or more receiving yards. You look at those games, the majority of his snaps in those games came on the outside, not in the slot. this is where Traquan Smith has the ability to really prove, like, excuse me, I don't want to say prove, but to really show his impact outside of the city of New Orleans, because we know his impact as a contested catch guy, making those tough catches and being somebody that can play all on the offense. But he becomes a little bit more of a household name potentially in 2021 because he'll finally get to play on the outside, which is where he did the most damage in college, but where he hasn't been able to focus so far over the course of his NFL career. So this is a big year for Traquan Smith.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking to draft Traquan Smith this year in fantasy. I'm always looking for sleepers who everybody's going to end up sleeping on and ends up breaking out. You look at tight end. So you lost Jared Cook. Where is he at? I think he's with the Chargers now.
Chargers. Mm-hmm.
So who's going to be the starting tight end this year?
Yeah, so the a whole lot of change over at the tight end position because you had Jared Cook go to the Chargers, you had Josh Hill go to the Detroit Lions and then retire soon after. And so now you have Adam Troutman, second-year tight end. He was drafted last year out of Dayton. The New Orleans Saints traded their entire day 3 of selections in 2020 to trade up and draft him at the end of the day or at the end of the second day of the draft in the 3rd round last year, and then basically just called the draft quits. They're like, all right, we're good. We got Cesar Reeves, we got Zach Bond, got Adam Troutman. We're happy. We're out of here. And then they ended up with their petty move in terms of trading back up for Tommy Stevens and all this other stuff to kind of stick it to the Carolina Panthers. But when it comes to Adam Troutman, he now becomes your kind of assumed tight end 1. They signed Nick Vanette, who's a great blocking tight end, but also has a little bit of receiving prowess as well. He did that pretty well in Seattle, but was mostly used as a blocker when he was in Denver. And then you also saw them bring in a couple of other tight ends, and then they have some guys that they're familiar with, like Garrett Griffin off of the practice squad, who I think becomes tight end 3 going in here. And you also have Juwan Johnson, who was an undrafted free agent wide receiver last year, who's moving to tight end this offseason. So I think he'll earn a practice squad spot that way. But for me, Adam Troutman is going to be tight end 1. 900 plus receiving touchdowns in Dayton his final year, 10 plus touchdowns. He was in double digits there. He has a very, very good reputation as a pass catcher. He just wasn't asked to do that as the 3rd tight end on the roster last year in 2020. Instead, he was asked to be a good blocker, and he was outstanding as a blocker his rookie season, which is very rare because you're learning all new blocking schemes as a tight end. The tight end position from college to the NFL is completely different. And so it's a hard one to be able to make that leap. He did that, and now he's earned himself the spot as the leader in that tight end room.
It's funny that you mentioned the transition from playing tight end in college to the NFL. I've been trying to tell people this about Kyle Pitts. It's like, okay, yep. I understand how great he's going to be, but you're asking a guy who normally when you look at rookie tight ends, the most you get out of them is going to be 500 yards. But people think Kyle Pitts is going to come in and immediately just go crazy. But like, you got to learn not only the route tree from the tight end position, but you're learning the blocking schemes. On top of that, they're going to be utilizing him at wide receiver in certain scenarios. So right. I definitely remember Adam Troutman when he was coming out. He was like, the biggest discussion was like, he played in Dayton. You know, it was a step down in competition. But when you watched him play there in Dayton, he was a man amongst boys pretty much. You knew who he was pretty much. Right. It was him and everybody else on the field.
Yeah,
now,
absolutely.
When you look at the offensive line, is there any concern? Because I still think New Orleans has a pretty good offensive line.
Yeah, I think their offensive line is one of their 3 best and most consistent position groups coming into this season. Cesar Ruiz was a big question mark, right? They drafted him in the 1st round last year, tried to move him to right guard, but he only got like a week and a half to really practice that because we had the truncated training camp, and then he was injured for half of it. And then he spent half of what he was available for working at right guard, and then the other half working at center. And then at the beginning of the season, he was kind of in and out with Nick Easton. Now he's 100% focused on becoming a better guard, as we saw him actually progress throughout the 2020 year as well. And then they get to keep Eric McCoy at center, who's been outstanding there, and then the bookends of course, Ryan Ramczyk and Teron Armstead. Ryan Ramczyk, who they just agreed to a contract extension with, but was very necessary over at the tackle positions, and Andrus Peat over at left guard. So they've done a good job retaining all that. They have a great backup in James Hurst that can play just about any position you need him to. And then they drafted Landon Young in the 6th round, who comes from the SEC's best offensive line over the course of the last few years, the Big Blue Wall, as they called it in Kentucky. And he's somebody that they drafted in the 6th round, but could be another another Zach Strief level draft selection for them in terms of being a career New Orleans Saint that ends up being a starting tackle at some point in his future. But they have good depth there. They have a great starting five. They've maintained consistency and cohesion amongst a unit that really has to be consistent, and at least in terms of their communication. They're all very familiar with each other, and they're all athletic, which is really important to the Saints' zone run scheme.
When you look at the running back position, we know about Alvin Kamara, but who is the second option behind Alvin Kamara? Because I know you guys always like to, you don't give Alvin Kamara like a full workload. You always like to spell him out with somebody who gets a good amount. Is it Latavius Murray?
It is. Yeah.
He's still there?
Yep, he's still there. He was somebody that I thought could potentially be a cap casualty, but now that they're $11+ million under the salary cap somehow this season, then he shouldn't have anything to worry about, because if anything, he's a $3 million cap cut. So there's really no point in sacrificing him for that money when he's given you really good production over the course of the last two seasons. 146 carries in each of the last two seasons, with a better yards per carry average in 2020 than he had in 2019. He was given the ball on 12 third down runs, converted 11 of those for first downs. And over the course of the 9-game win streak that the Saints had in 2020, he and Alvin Kamara combined for 146 yards and 2 touchdowns per game during that time. So they were very, very efficient, sitting next to one another or in place of one another. And I think Latavius Murray continues to be that second part of that two-headed attack in the backfield in 2021, maybe with a little bit more utilization in the run game, just over 40 targets last year. I think you could, in the passing game, just over 40 targets last year. I think you could see that number go up in 2021, especially with the 17th game.
Jesus, man, I was surprised. I had to pull that name from all the way in the back of my brain because, I cover all 32 NFL teams.
Right,
so,
absolutely.
A lot of people always ask how you know all these players, and I was surprised I remember.
Hey, you got it.
Yeah, I just remember because, Latavius Murray was just, I just remember there were a couple of games. I was like, okay, Alvin Kamara was having the great games. I remember, Alvin Kamara had a 5-touchdown game, but there were some games when Latavius Murray came in and, he was like a wrecking ball per se.
He had that first half against the Detroit Lions last year where he had 14 carries, 64 yards, and 2 touchdowns in the first half. And that was another one where it brought you back to the 2019 season where 2 games in a row, I believe it was against the Chicago Bears and the Jacksonville Jaguars, if I remember correctly, to where Alvin Kamara was injured and Latavius Murray ran for over 100 yards in each of those games. And so I think that the Saints, their zone blocking scheme works really well for anybody that you put behind them as long as they can read and be patient. I mean, that's really all that it's about. And sorry, when I say that they can read, I mean scheme read and have vision on the field. They put in Ty Montgomery in week 17 in a game to where they lost their entire running back room because of COVID and all these other health and safety protocols, and you end up him going 104 rushing yards, if I remember correctly, in that game. So, I mean, their scheme really benefits running backs, and Latavius Murray's proven that he can operate in that system very well.
Before we move on to the defense, make sure that you guys checked on my guy, Ross Jackson, on the Locked On Saints podcast. A link to his channel will be down in the description in the pinned comment section down below. When you look at defense, okay, there's definitely some concerns. When you look at corner, you lost Janoris Jenkins. I know a lot of Saints fans were really upset about that. Where's Janoris Jenkins at now? Tennessee. So he goes to Tennessee, and I just saw a bunch of Saints fans just going absolute you guys there were a lot of you guys who were really livid, and everybody
were upset about it.
Yeah, everybody was he's 32, man. It's nothing. I was okay, he's 32. He may be in his 30s, but the dude is still playing really good football. So, I mean, how big is that loss of Janoris Jenkins going to be this year? Or do you guys have some guys behind the scenes that could end up breaking out, surprising a lot of people on the opposite side of Marshawn Lattimore?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the biggest loss on defense. And that's saying a lot because they also lost the linebacker, both linebackers next to Demario Davis. And so they're looking for young guys to step up there. You also lost 3 of the 6 top defensive linemen when it came to defensive snaps last year, and Malcolm Brown, Sheldon Rankins, and Trey Hendrickson, who of course had 13.5 sacks last season. And even with all of that, I'd say that the loss of Janoris Jenkins, due to the cuts that they had to make to get under that $100 million overage on the salary cap, is probably the biggest loss that they took this year outside of some of the things that they had to do on special teams. And so I think that the answer across from Marshall Lattimore isn't certain yet. On the roster, they drafted Paulson Adebo in the third round, but Paulson Adebo opted out of the 2020 season and got injured during the 2019 season and only played 9 games that season. So he hasn't played football full speed competition since let's say since November of 2019. So nearly 2 years by the time that the regular season begins in September of 2021. Now, I'm very high on Paulson Adebo, and I think Paulson Adebo is going to be a great player in the NFL, but he might just need time to get up to NFL speed and get up to NFL play calling. So I think that outside of that, the only other player that really makes sense right now for the Saints to put out there opposite Marshall Lattimore is Patrick Robinson, who has played his best games and his best seasons of his career in the slot, not on the outside. So you have to have some question marks there. Now, some of these other young guys could potentially step up. Grant Haley, but he's a little undersized at under 5'10". Keith Washington, who came in last year and just really balled out during camp, but can he do it again and prove consistency so he can earn that spot opposite Marshawn? Or do they go to the free agent market, which seems more likely? You have a lot of names out there, Drake Kirkpatrick, Garyon Conley, and perhaps my favorites in Steven Nelson and Richard Sherman that could potentially be not only good additions for the Saints for this year, and in Steven Nelson's case, Steven Nelson could be a good addition moving forward for the next few years at that spot, and Richard Sherman could be a very good mentor to help benefit the younger guys moving forward in the future at that spot. So I think both of them bring their own sort of intangible asset to it, as opposed to guys like Drake Kirkpatrick and Garyon Conley, who I guess Conley could pan out to be somebody during that time too, as a future. I mean, he was a former first rounder, drafted a little bit after Marshawn Lattimore in the same year. But I think that becomes the biggest question mark over on the defensive side is who's going to be there opposite Marshawn Lattimore and potentially even in place of Marshawn Lattimore if he's suspended for the first couple of games with the offseason arrest that he had.
Yeah, I think that Steven Nelson would be a really good fit coming from a Steelers fan. He was really good. Like, I was really surprised. Everybody says cap casualty, but it's like, I mean, like, it had to be some more things happening behind the scenes because the Steelers do have a lot of good depth there, but I really feel like Steven Nelson was really good. Like, I feel like he was a really underrated signing. And, anytime a player gets released for your team, everybody tries to downplay him and things like that. Right. Like, Steven Nelson was a top 20 corner when he played for Pittsburgh. So I definitely like the fit there. You look at the defensive line. Now, Marcus Davenport, I know there is a lot of pressure on him this year. When you think about what draft, was it 2018?
2018, yep.
You guys traded up pretty much the fan to get this guy, and the expectations are pretty lofty. I know he's had some injury problems trying to stay on the field and whatnot, kind of like a little bit of a rotational piece. So, like, is he the guy who has the most pressure to perform during this training camp for New Orleans this year?
I would say that he has the most pressure over the course of the season, honestly. They drafted Peyton Turner, who's another, 6'5" plus 280 plus pound defensive end that has a lot of very athletic traits. He's very long. I mean, he's a New Orleans Saints defensive lineman. That's what they like. They like big, they like versatile, and they like athletic. And Marcus Davenport fits the same bill. It's just that he hasn't really had the opportunity so far to really live up to the expectations that are around him that come with trading an additional first-round pick in order to move up and draft a defensive end in the top 15 when Lamar Jackson was still on the board at that time. And so I think that when you look at those expectations, it does really stack up against Marcus Davenport. So it's going to be whether or not he can sort of perform up to a level now that ends up doing that. He has the right mentality. He's doing all the right things over the course of this offseason. We talked to him at media availability during mini camps, and one of the things that he told us is that he's just working on trying to, first of all, get the mentality right going into 2021, which I think is important. The Saints have shown him a vote of confidence because they already picked up his fifth-year option for next year. So they're telling him that they believe that he can pan out and they believe that he can live up to the expectations. Now it's about proving it to himself and being able to go out there and actually perform. And
you guys still have Cam Jordan, so I don't think the pass rush is in completely bad shape. Now, when you look at the interior, like, is there going to be a position battle in mind? Like, who are going to be the guys competing at those spots?
Yeah, well, I think David Onyemata is going to be your pass rushing, penetrating three tech player that can move into nose tackle, that one tech, zero tech type of conversation. But I think you're going to be watching guys like Shai Tuttle, Malcolm Roach, and Ryan Glasgow competing throughout camp in the preseason to potentially be the guy next to David Onyemata. David Onyemata is going to be just about an every down guy. Now, the Saints rotate their defensive line like crazy. You end up seeing 8, 9 defensive linemen playing in different positions, different assignments, different techniques, and different orientations all throughout a game. I've tracked before that they put out over 60 different defensive line combinations in terms of different player personnel as well as different assignments per player throughout in a single game. So they've done this quite a bit. I mean, it was a game where they played 80 plus snaps because it went into overtime. And so you saw a lot of different combinations going into that. So they've done a ton over the course of their season in terms of getting these guys snaps. But I think that figuring out who's going to be sort of the stalwart, if you will, next to David Onyemata, that's going to be a big conversation. I think Shai Tuttle is probably ahead in that conversation right now, but some of these other guys, as well as some undrafted free agents, could potentially move up there. And keep an eye out on the name Jalen Dalton, somebody that the Saints really liked a lot, but unfortunately got hurt during camp last year. We'll see if he can stay healthy and earn his spot that I think he can get on the 53-man roster in 2021.
The Saints got really good play out of their linebacker unit last season. Should any of that change? Because who was it? You guys have like this really is Demario Davis's name?
Mm-hmm. He's the main guy. He's still around.
He's like, is he like, how old is he? Like, is he old?
32.
And he's still playing like really well. Like he was like a top 5 linebacker last year. So you have him. Who else do you guys have behind him? Because everybody just knows him, but like I want a lot of people to know the other guys because the whole entire linebacker unit balled out last season.
Yeah, the issue is that the two other linebackers that saw the most snaps last year, opposite or next to Demario Davis, are gone. Quan Alexander had his Achilles injury after 7 games. The Saints traded for him at the trade deadline to replace Alex Anzalone, whose play was down early on in the season. He's now in Detroit, joining former New Orleans Saints assistant head coach Dan Campbell and former secondary coach Aaron Glenn, who are both there now as head coach and defensive coordinator, respectively. And so now there's a big question mark and there's a big hole next to Demario Davis. And who's going to fill that, we don't know yet. Pete Werner seems like the most logical guy at the moment. He feels like the most pro-ready of the 6-person draft class that the Saints had this year. Kind of a, I'm going to use a big-time cliche here, but kind of a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none type of player. But he does everything well. I mean, he really does. He's really good in pursuit of the quarterback, even though he's not a full-time pass rusher. He does a very good job climbing laterally to cut off running backs that are running parallel to him, and he can carry a tight end up the seam. So he does a very good job in zone and man coverage. Not elite in any one thing, though. He's not a big-time playmaker with a bunch of interceptions. He doesn't cause a ton of fumbles, but he is a secure tackler. So you take good play, you take steady good play over flashy, up and down high variance play any day. And so I think that Pete Werner seems to be the guy there, but the Saints still have 5 positions or 5 roster spots open heading into training camp, only 85 of 90 so far. So could they add to the linebacker position potentially? And could a guy like Zach Bond, who they invested in 2 years ago and are working on converting from edge rusher to off-ball linebacker, have a quicker transition than expected? I think that Pete Werner is probably in the lead in that conversation, though.
Last position we got to talk about safety because you have my guy, Marcus Williams, which everybody, when you think about Marcus Williams, everybody still remembers, the missed tackle against the Minnesota Vikings and Stephon Diggs. And I still try to tell people this, like, he is one of the best at his position, but, that's all people will think about. But he's playing on the franchise tag. Who are the other guys who are going to be playing alongside of him, and who's going to be the guy behind him? Because if he doesn't end up being retained, who can end up stepping in, replacing his role next season?
Yeah, they'll look to work on getting a long-term extension done. It's a big part of what they're doing right now because there's a deadline, and of course, deadlines spur action. So they have to get that done before July 15th, before that ends up becoming a franchise tag that he has to play on and becoming a free agent next year. But the guys around him at the safety position, which I think is one of the other, I talked about I think it was the offensive line position I mentioned as one of the strongest positions. Safety, I think, is their strongest position on the team, the absolute best that they have at the position group from top to bottom, because you have Marcus Williams, who's at the top of that, but then you also have Malcolm Jenkins, who might have just played one of the best seasons of his career in returning to New Orleans. Tied career highs across tackles for a loss, sacks. He had second best in terms of tackles for a loss, but tied his career high in terms of sacks as well as interceptions. And that was him returning to a team where he didn't get a training camp to learn the new system, and now he actually gets a full offseason to work with these guys and develop and develop a rapport. And so I think Malcolm Jenkins becomes your guy that continues to play in the box close to the line of scrimmage. He's oftentimes an additional pass rusher for them as well. And then you look at CD Deuce is what he goes by, but CJ Gardner-Johnson or Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, depending upon how you're referring to him. In Jacksonville, I think you probably have a little bit of recollection of him from Florida, of course, with the Gators. And so I think that there's a good spot for him to continue to play at the slot, which he's one of the best in the league at, but we'll see what he ends up continuing to be able to do over the course of time as well, because he could transition to either Marcus Williams spots or Malcolm Jenkins spot in the future. And then they also have JT Gray, who's a premier special teamer for them and doesn't give up a lot when he gets an opportunity at the safety spot too. So I feel very confident in the Saints safety room.
Yeah, Chauncey Gardner reminds me a lot of Tyrann Mathieu coming out in terms of how you can utilize him. And I've been telling people this. The NFL is starting to change. Now everybody wants this hybrid Tyrann Mathieu style safety who can come down, play the slot, but also rotate and play safety if need be. So I really like him. I remember his name being called in a lot of games, aside from the scuffles that he had on the field and whatnot.
Yeah, I think those are things that built up his reputation, right? Across recognizability. And
had something with Michael Thomas too.
Yeah, and that actually led to a suspension for Michael Thomas. Not an actual suspension, but he was sat for a game by the team so that they didn't mess with his money. If they suspend him, then guarantees become unguaranteed, and they weren't going to do that to any of their players. And so they just sat him for that game. But I think that you look at what CJ Gardner-Johnson has done in terms of being the most targeted slot defender in 2020, but giving up the sixth lowest passer rating, as well as the seventh lowest when it came to yards per target allowed. I mean, the guy's just been absolutely outstanding, because even when he does allow a catch, he's right there to make sure that you're not going anywhere after that catch. So he really gets on a lot of people's nerves because of his ability to be able to stop you in your tracks.
That's what you want to see, man. Like I said, like I had an old coach tell me one time, if you can't stop them, at least try to get in their head, and that seems to be working for him. So I have no problem with it. So before we let you go, one more time, let the people know where they can find you at and what you have coming up on the channel.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Twitter at Ross Jackson Nola, Nola, and you can just search the Locked On Saints podcast here on YouTube and subscribe there. Turn on notifications as well. And of course, you can also check out the podcast if you ever need to take it on the go, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is that you listen. So you can check those out wherever and every day. Episodes are up every Monday through Friday. Got another one coming up or continuing 5 days a week as we get closer and closer here to training camp. And of course, you can check out CanalStreetChronicles.com as we continue to keep you up to date there as well.
All right, man. I appreciate you for coming on. And for those of you guys who are watching, make sure that you guys check out my guy, Ross Jackson, on the Locked On Saints podcast. Link to it down in the description, comment section down below. Also, make sure that you guys subscribe to my channel as well. Leave a like on the video. And thanks for watching.